Imagine this. You're sitting across from the man you've loved for 5 years, the man you've built a life with, shared dreams with, trusted with every fiber of your being. He's on one knee, holding a ring, and asking you to marry him. Your heart is racing, tears are streaming down your face, and you're thinking, this is it. This is the moment I've been waiting for. But what if I told you that proposal, that beautiful, tearful moment, was nothing more than a calculated lie? What if the man you loved, the man whose child you were carrying, only wanted one thing from you? Not your love, not your future, just a piece of paper. A green card. And what if, while you were 4 months pregnant with his baby, he was sleeping with not one, not two, but 3 other women behind your back? This is the story of a woman who thought she knew what love was, a woman who believed in forever, a woman who learned the hard way that some people don't see you as a partner, they see you as a tool. And when she finally discovered the truth, she didn't just walk away. She made sure karma got a little help. So buckle up, because this story is going to take you through betrayal, heartbreak, and one of the most satisfying confrontations you'll ever hear. And trust me, by the end, you'll understand why sometimes justice isn't just about the law, it's about making someone face exactly what they've done. This is a story about trust broken, love betrayed, and the moment one woman decided she'd had enough. It's about the lies we tell ourselves when we're in love, the red flags we ignore because we want so badly to believe in the fairy tale, and the strength it takes to walk away from everything you thought your life was going to be. It's also a story about karma, real, tangible, beautiful karma. The kind that doesn't just happen on its own, but sometimes needs a little nudge from someone who refuses to let injustice slide. Before we dive in, I need you to understand something. This woman, let's call her Sarah, because that's what she asked to be called when she shared her story. She wasn't naive. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't one of those people who ignore obvious red flags and then act shocked when things fall apart. She was smart, independent, successful in her own right. She had friends who loved her, family who supported her, a career she was proud of. But love, real love, or what you think is real love, it can make even the smartest person overlook things they'd normally catch in a heartbeat. It can make you rationalize behavior that, if you saw your best friend's boyfriend doing it, you'd be telling her to run. It can make you believe in someone so completely that when the truth finally hits, it doesn't just hurt. It shatters your entire understanding of reality. So as you hear this story, don't judge Sarah for not seeing it sooner. Don't think, I would have known. Because the truth is, when you're in it, when you're living it day by day, when someone is looking you in the eyes and telling you they love you, it's not as obvious as it seems from the outside. And that's exactly what makes this betrayal so devastating. Because it wasn't just about cheating. It wasn't just about lying. It was about a systematic, calculated manipulation that lasted years. It was about a man who saw a good woman and decided to use her for his own purposes, without any regard for the damage he'd cause. But here's what he didn't count on. Sarah was stronger than he gave her credit for. And when she finally saw the truth, when all the pieces fell into place and she understood exactly what had been done to her, she didn't just crumble. She got even. Not in a petty way, not in an illegal way, but in a way that exposed him for exactly who he was, that brought consequences he'd thought he could avoid, that made sure everyone in his life knew the truth about the man behind the charming smile. So let's go back to where it all started. Back before the betrayal, before the lies were exposed, before everything fell apart. Back to a sunny afternoon in San Diego when Sarah met a man who would change her life. just not in the way she thought. 5 years before that proposal, 5 years before everything came crashing down, Sarah met him at a mutual friend's barbecue in San Diego. It was one of those perfect California summer afternoons, the kind you see in movies and think can't possibly be real. But if you've ever spent a summer on the California coast, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The sky was that endless, impossibly blue that only happens in Southern California. Not a cloud in sight. The temperature was hovering around 78 degrees, warm enough to be comfortable in shorts and a tank top, but with that cool ocean breeze that keeps you from getting too hot. The kind of weather where you can sit outside for hours and never want to go inside. Sarah's friend Jessica was hosting the barbecue at her place in Ocean Beach, a cute little rental house about 6 blocks from the water. The backyard was strung with those Edison bulb lights that everyone was using at the time, even though it was still afternoon and they wouldn't turn on for hours. There was a portable speaker playing a mix of reggae and indie rock, the kind of chill music that sets the perfect vibe for a laid-back gathering. The smell of burgers and hot dogs on the grill mixed with the salty ocean air, and there must have been about 20 people there, a mix of Jessica's friends from work, some neighbors, a few people from her yoga class, and some +1s who nobody really knew, but everyone welcomed anyway. Sarah hadn't been particularly excited about going, if she was being honest. She'd just gotten out of a relationship about 3 months prior. Nothing dramatic, just one of those situations where you realize you're with someone more out of habit than actual love, and you both kind of mutually agree it's run its course. She'd been enjoying being single, focusing on building her graphic design business, spending more time with friends she'd neglected during the relationship, rediscovering who she was outside of a couple. But Jessica had insisted. "You've been hiding in your apartment working on your laptop for 3 months straight," Jessica had said over the phone the week before. "You need sunshine. You need social interaction with humans who aren't clients. And you need some of my famous potato salad. Plus, there's going to be some really interesting people there. You never know who you might meet." Sarah had rolled her eyes at that last part. Jessica was always trying to set her up with someone, always insisting that Sarah just needed to meet the right person. But Sarah wasn't interested in meeting anyone. She was perfectly content being single, thank you very much. Still, she went. Because Jessica was her best friend. Because the weather was beautiful. Because she did need to get out of her apartment. And honestly, because Jessica's potato salad really was that good. She arrived around 2 in the afternoon, wearing cut-off jean shorts and a loose white tank top, her dark hair pulled up in a messy bun because it was too hot to have it down. She'd grabbed a 6-pack of some local IPA on the way over as her contribution to the party. And when she walked into the backyard, Jessica immediately swooped in with a hug and a, "Finally! I was starting to think you were going to bail on me." "I said I'd come, didn't I?" Sarah laughed, handing over the beer. "You say a lot of things. Following through is a different story when you're in hermit mode." Jessica grabbed her hand and started pulling her toward the cluster of people by the grill. "Come on, there are some people I want you to meet." But before they could get there, someone called Jessica's name from inside the house. Apparently, there was some crisis with the speaker system, and Jessica abandoned Sarah with a quick, "Just mingle. I'll be right back." So Sarah found herself standing there, slightly awkward, scanning the crowd for anyone she knew. She recognized a few faces, people she'd met at previous gatherings, people who worked with Jessica, people who were friends of friends in that way that happens in your late 20s, where your social circles all start overlapping. She grabbed a beer from one of the coolers, popped it open, and was trying to decide whether to join a conversation or just find a chair and people watch when she heard a voice behind her. "Let me guess. You're trying to calculate the minimum amount of time you need to stay before you can politely leave without offending the host." She turned around, and there he was. Later, looking back, she'd remember every detail of that first moment. The way the sunlight hit his face, the easy confidence in his posture, the way his smile reached his eyes in a way that seemed genuine, unguarded. He was tall, about 6'1", with dark hair that was just slightly too long, like he was a week overdue for a haircut, but in a way that looked intentional rather than messy. He had brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, suggesting he smiled a lot. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, nothing fancy, but he wore them well. There was something about his energy, warm, approachable, like he was the kind of person who could talk to anyone and make them feel comfortable. And his smile, God, his smile. It was the kind of smile that made you want to smile back, that made you feel like you were in on some private joke together. Sarah laughed despite herself. That obvious, huh? Only because I was thinking the exact same thing. I'm a +1 for my buddy Carlos over there. He gestured toward a guy manning the grill. And I know exactly 3 people at this party. So I'm currently in that awkward phase of trying to look like I'm having a great time, while actually wondering if anyone would notice if I just quietly disappeared. Well, now you know 4 people, Sarah said, extending her hand. I'm Sarah. Diego, he said, shaking her hand. His grip was firm, but not aggressive, and his hand was warm. And technically, knowing your name doesn't mean I know you. That requires at least, he paused, pretending to calculate, minimum 15 minutes of conversation. 20 if we want to be friends. 30 if we're going to be the kind of friends who actually text each other and not just run into each other at parties and go, "Hey, how've you been?" and never actually follow up. Sarah found herself grinning. There was something disarming about his humor, about the way he made fun of the exact social awkwardness they were both experiencing. Okay then, she said, settling into a lawn chair and gesturing for him to take the one next to her. 15 minutes minimum. Tell me 3 things about yourself, and one of them has to be interesting. He sat down, and for the next hour, way longer than 15 minutes, they talked. And it was easy in a way that Sarah hadn't experienced in a long time. There was no awkward silence, no struggling to find things to say, no feeling like she had to perform or be anything other than herself. He told her about growing up in Brazil, in a small city called Curitiba in the southern part of the country. He talked about his childhood, about playing soccer in the streets with his friends until it got dark, about his mother's cooking, about how different everything had been when his family moved to the United States when he was 16. It was such a culture shock, he said, leaning back in his chair with his beer balanced on the armrest. Everything from the food to the language to the way people interacted. In Brazil, everyone's so much more physical, you know? Lots of hugging, kissing on the cheek, standing close when you talk. Here, everyone's got their personal space bubble, and if you get too close, they look at you like you're invading their territory. Did you have a hard time adjusting? Sarah asked. At first, yeah. High school was brutal. My English was pretty rough, and kids can be cruel when you're different. Plus, I had to give up my whole life, my friends, my extended family, everything familiar, to move to this completely foreign place. But my parents did it for better opportunities, you know? They wanted me and my sister to have access to education, to jobs, to a future that was harder to build in Brazil. Do you ever regret it? Moving here, I mean? He was quiet for a moment, looking thoughtful. Sometimes I miss it. Miss the culture, the language, the way of life. But honestly, this is home now. I've been here longer than I lived there at this point. This is where I built my adult life, where my career is, where my friends are. I go back to visit family sometimes, but it's not the same. You can't go back, you know? You can only move forward. There was something almost melancholy in the way he said it, a hint of loss beneath the acceptance. Sarah found it endearing, this glimpse of something deeper, something vulnerable beneath the easy charm. He asked about her life, and she found herself opening up in a way she usually didn't with someone she'd just met. She told him about growing up in San Diego, about how she'd always been the creative kid, the one who was doodling in the margins of her notebooks, who chose art electives over sports, who spent hours making flyers and posters for her friends' bands, even though they never went anywhere. "I always knew I wanted to do something creative," she said. "But I also knew the whole starving artist thing wasn't really for me. So I went to school for graphic design. Creative enough to satisfy that part of my brain, but practical enough to actually make money at it." "Smart," Diego said. "So you're freelance now?" "Yeah, I started my own business about 2 years ago." It was terrifying at first, giving up the security of a regular paycheck, being responsible for finding my own clients, doing my own taxes, all of it. But I love it. I get to choose who I work with, what projects I take on, how I structure my time. Some days I work 12 hours straight because I'm in the zone, and some days I take off at 2 in the afternoon to go to the beach because I can. That freedom is worth the instability. "What kind of projects do you do?" "Mostly branding for small businesses, logos, websites, marketing materials. Sometimes I do work for events, invitations, programs, signage. Occasionally I get hired for illustration work, which is my favorite because it's the most creative. I just finished a project for this local brewery where I designed these really intricate labels for their seasonal beers, and seeing them actually printed and on bottles in stores was such a cool feeling." "That sounds amazing. Do you have a portfolio I could check out?" And just like that, they were talking about her work, about his job. He worked in construction management for a company that built commercial properties, about their favorite spots in San Diego, about travel, about the places they'd been and the places they wanted to go. Diego talked about how much he loved the energy of California, how different it was from anywhere else he'd lived. "There's this optimism here, you know? Like anything's possible. Like you can just decide to reinvent yourself and nobody questions it. I love that." They talked about music. Turned out they both loved old-school hip-hop and had been to some of the same concerts. They talked about food. He was passionate about cooking and described his mother's feijoada in such vivid detail that Sarah's stomach growled even though she'd just eaten a burger. "You're making me hungry again," she laughed. "That's the goal. Food is meant to be passionate. If you're not describing it in a way that makes people want to eat it, you're doing it wrong." They talked about their families. Sarah described her parents, her dad, who was a high school history teacher, her mom, who ran a small boutique in North Park, her younger sister, who was in grad school studying environmental science, her childhood dog who'd passed away the year before, and she still wasn't over. Diego talked about his mother and sister who still lived in the area, his father who'd passed away a few years back from a heart attack. There was real grief in his voice when he talked about his dad, and Sarah felt herself soften toward him even more. Loss had a way of making people more human, more real. At some point, Jessica came over and made a very unsubtle face at Sarah that clearly said, "I see you've met someone." But she didn't interrupt, just gave Sarah a thumbs up behind Diego's back and walked away grinning. The afternoon turned into evening. The Edison lights came on, casting a warm glow over the backyard. The crowd thinned out a bit as people left, but Sarah and Diego barely noticed. They were in that bubble that happens sometimes when you meet someone you connect with, where the rest of the world kind of fades into the background, and it's just the two of you, talking and laughing like you've known each other for years instead of hours. "So," Diego said at one point, when there was a natural lull in the conversation, "I have to admit, when Carlos dragged me to this party, I was kind of dreading it. I'm not really a stand around making small talk with strangers kind of person." "And yet you approached me specifically to make small talk," Sarah pointed out. "That's different. You looked like you were plotting your escape, which meant you were my kind of people. Plus, I don't know. He paused, looking at her with an expression that was harder to read. "You have kind eyes. That probably sounds cheesy, but it's true. I saw you standing there and thought, she seems like someone I'd like to know." Sarah felt her cheeks warm, and she was glad for the dim lighting that might hide her blush. "Not cheesy. Sweet." "Good, because I'm going to follow it up with something that might cross the line into actual cheese. Can I get your number? I'd really like to see you again. Maybe take you to dinner somewhere that's not a backyard barbecue, where we can actually hear each other without someone's terrible playlist in the background." Sarah laughed. "The playlist isn't that bad." "Sarah, they just played Wonderwall. Nobody needs to hear Wonderwall in 2018. "Fair point." She pulled out her phone and handed it to him. "Put your number in." He did, then immediately called himself so he'd have her number too. When his phone buzzed in his pocket, he smiled. "Perfect. So, what are you doing Tuesday night?" "Probably working on a project that's due Wednesday morning, if I'm being honest." "What about Wednesday night then, after you turn in your project?" "Wednesday works." "Great. I know this Brazilian place in Hillcrest that makes the best picanha you've ever had. Very casual, nothing fancy, but the food is incredible." "That sounds perfect." They talked for another half hour, until Sarah finally checked the time and realized it was almost 10 o'clock. She'd been at this barbecue for 8 hours, and most of that time had been spent talking to Diego. When she finally left, Jessica walked her to her car with the biggest "I told you so" grin on her face. "Don't say it," Sarah warned. "I'm not saying anything. I'm just smiling because my best friend just spent an entire afternoon talking to a very attractive man who seemed very interested in her." "It was just conversation." "Sarah, you gave him your number. He asked you out. That's more than just conversation." "Okay, fine. He seems nice, but I'm not getting my hopes up. It was probably just a party thing, you know? We were both a little bored. We talked. It was nice. Doesn't mean it's going to turn into anything." But even as she said it, Sarah knew she didn't really believe it. There had been something different about Diego, about the way they'd connected, something that felt like the beginning of something real. When she got home that night, she had a text waiting from an unknown number. "This is Diego from the barbecue. Just wanted to make sure you got home safe. Also wanted to say that today was really great. Can't wait for Wednesday. Sleep well." Sarah saved his number and responded, "Home safe. Today was great. See you Wednesday." And as she got ready for bed, she found herself smiling. Maybe, despite her best efforts to stay single and focus on herself, she was about to get pulled into something. And for the first time in a while, that didn't sound like a bad thing. Wednesday couldn't come fast enough. Liter's first official date was everything a first date should be. Diego picked her up at 7, on time, which Sarah appreciated because punctuality said something about a person's respect for your time. He was wearing dark jeans and a button-down shirt. Nothing too formal, but clearly he'd made an effort. He opened the car door for her, which some people might find old-fashioned, but Sarah thought was sweet. The restaurant he'd chosen was called Sabor do Brasil, tucked into a small strip mall in Hillcrest that you'd never notice unless you were specifically looking for it. From the outside, it didn't look like much, just a small storefront with a hand-painted sign. But the moment they walked in, Sarah was hit with the most incredible smells. Grilled meat, garlic, spices she couldn't quite identify, but that made her mouth water immediately. The interior was small and cozy, maybe 10 tables total, with Brazilian flags and soccer jerseys decorating the walls. There was a TV in the corner, playing what looked like a Brazilian soccer game, and the few other diners in the place all seemed to be speaking Portuguese. It felt authentic in a way that chain restaurants never could. "This place is amazing," Sarah said as they sat down. "Right? Most people have no idea it's here. The couple who owns it, they're from the same region of Brazil as my family. The food tastes exactly like what my mom makes. I practically live here." They ordered. Diego insisted she try the picanha, which he explained was a specific cut of beef that was a staple of Brazilian barbecue. It's seasoned with just salt, grilled over an open flame, and it's so tender it basically melts in your mouth. Trust me on this. While they waited for the food, they fell back into the easy conversation they'd started at the barbecue. But this time, it went deeper. Maybe it was the setting, more intimate than a crowded backyard party. Or maybe it was that they'd already established they liked each other. Whatever the reason, the conversation felt more substantial, more revealing. Diego asked about her past relationships, and Sarah gave him the abbreviated version. Nothing too dramatic. A few boyfriends in college, a couple of serious relationships in my 20s. The last one ended a few months ago, but it was pretty mutual. We'd been together for about a year, and I don't know, we were going through the motions more than actually being present with each other. It felt more like a friendship than a relationship by the end. We both knew it wasn't going anywhere, so we called it. "How do you feel about it now?" Diego asked. "Honestly? Relieved. I think we stayed together longer than we should have because it was comfortable, because breaking up felt like admitting failure. But being single again has been really good for me. I've had time to focus on my work, on my friendships, on myself. I forgot how much I actually like my own company." "That's healthy," Diego said. "A lot of people can't be alone. They jump from relationship to relationship because they need someone else to feel complete." "What about you?" Sarah asked. "What's your relationship history?" Diego took a sip of his beer, and for a moment, Sarah saw something flicker across his face. Something that might have been hesitation or discomfort, but it passed so quickly she couldn't be sure. "I had a serious girlfriend back in Brazil before we moved. We dated for about 2 years, from when I was 14 to 16. I thought I was going to marry her, which sounds ridiculous now because we were so young. But at that age, you think those feelings are going to last forever, right?" "What happened?" "We moved. And long distance at 16, across countries, with different time zones and no money for visits, it just wasn't sustainable. We tried for a few months, but it faded. Last I heard, she got married and has a couple of kids." "And since then?" "A few relationships here and there. One serious one in my early 20s that lasted about 3 years. That one ended because she wanted to move back east for grad school, and I couldn't leave. My mom and sister are here. My job was here. My whole life was here. We tried long distance for about 6 months, but it wasn't working. She needed me to be there, and I couldn't be. So we ended it." "That must have been hard." "It was. But looking back, I think we both knew deep down that it wasn't right. If it had been the right relationship, one of us would have figured out how to make the geography work. The fact that neither of us was willing to uproot our lives for the other tells you something, you know?" Sarah nodded. "Have you been single since then?" "On and off. I dated someone for about a year and a half ago. That one ended because I wasn't as invested as I should have been. She was great. She deserved someone who was all in, and I just wasn't. It wasn't fair to her, so I ended it." "That's mature of you." "A lot of people would just string it along." Diego shrugged. "I've been on the receiving end of that, and it sucks. I'd rather be alone than waste someone's time." The food arrived, and it was every bit as good as Diego had promised. The picanha was perfectly cooked, crusty and caramelized on the outside, tender and juicy on the inside. It came with rice, beans, farofa, which Diego explained was toasted cassava flour, and vinaigrette salsa. Sarah tried everything, and every bite was incredible. "Okay, you were right," she said around a mouthful of meat. "This is amazing. I would never lead you astray when it comes to food. Food is sacred. They talked about travel, places they'd been, places they wanted to go. Diego talked about wanting to take Sarah to Brazil someday, to show her where he grew up, to introduce her to his extended family who still lived there. It was a casual comment, but Sarah noticed it. The way he was already thinking about future trips together, already imagining her as part of his life in that way. She told him about her dream to visit Japan, about how she'd been fascinated by Japanese art and design since college. There's something about the aesthetic, the simplicity, the attention to detail, the way they approach design. I've been saving up for years to do a proper trip, like 2 or 3 weeks where I can really explore. We should go together, Diego said, and again, that casual inclusion of her in his future plans. They talked about their families more. Sarah described her parents' relationship, how they'd been married for 33 years and still seemed genuinely in love. They're kind of my relationship goals, honestly. They still go on dates, they still laugh together, they still choose each other every day. That's what I want. Not just passion and romance, but partnership. Someone who's your best friend as much as your lover. That's rare, Diego said. My parents had that too. I remember watching my dad look at my mom, even after 25 years of marriage, like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. After he died, my mom said the hardest part wasn't the big things, it was the small things. Having coffee alone in the morning, not having someone to share little jokes with, going to bed without someone to talk to about the day. That's heartbreaking, Sarah said softly. Yeah, but also kind of beautiful in a way. They had something real, something that lasted. Not everyone gets that. The conversation drifted to lighter topics, favorite movies, embarrassing stories from their teenage years, the worst jobs they'd ever had. Diego told her about working at a fast food restaurant when he first moved to the States, about how he'd completely butchered taking orders in English and once accidentally told a customer to have a nice death instead of have a nice day. Sarah told him about her brief stint working retail in college, about the time a customer had thrown a pair of jeans at her face because they didn't have her size in stock. I quit that same day. Just took off my name tag, left it on the counter, and walked out. I decided right then that I'd rather be broke than deal with people who think treating retail workers like garbage is acceptable. Good for you. Nobody should put up with that. By the time they finished dinner, it was almost 10 o'clock. They'd been there for 3 hours, and Sarah couldn't remember the last time a first date had gone that well. Usually, by the end of dinner, you're running out of things to say, ready to call it a night. But with Diego, she wasn't ready for the evening to end. He must have felt the same way, because when they got back to his car, he turned to her and said, "Do you have to be up early tomorrow?" "Not particularly. Why?" "There's this spot I want to show you. It's about a 20-minute drive, but it's worth it. Best view of the city you'll ever see." "Is this where you bring all your first dates?" Sarah teased. "Actually, I've never brought anyone here. It's kind of my spot, where I go when I need to think or clear my head. But I want to share it with you." How was she supposed to say no to that? They drove north, into the hills above the city. Diego played music, a mix of Brazilian artists Sarah had never heard of, and he translated some of the lyrics for her as they drove. The roads got narrower and windier as they climbed, until finally, he pulled over at what looked like just a random spot on the side of the road. "Come on," he said, getting out of the car. She followed him through a small gap in the bushes, down a narrow trail that she definitely would have missed if she hadn't been with him. They walked for maybe 5 minutes, the path lit only by the moonlight and the flashlight on Diego's phone, until suddenly the trees opened up and they were standing on an outcropping of rock that overlooked the entire city. Sarah's breath caught. The view was spectacular. The lights of San Diego spread out below them like a blanket of stars, the ocean dark and endless beyond it, the city skyline glittering in the distance. "You could see everything from up here," Downtown, the bay, the bridge, the airport with its runway lights, the neighborhoods sprawling in all directions. Diego, this is incredible. Right? I found it by accident a few years ago when I was hiking. Most people don't know it's here because the trail isn't marked, but it's become my favorite place in the city. They sat down on the rock, side by side, legs dangling over the edge. It was quiet up here. No traffic noise, no voices, just the occasional rustle of wind through the trees and the distant sounds of the city below. "Can I ask you something?" Diego said after a few minutes of comfortable silence. "Sure." "What are you looking for? In a relationship, I mean. What do you want?" It was a surprisingly direct question for a first date, but Sarah appreciated it. She thought for a moment before answering. "Honestly? Partnership. I want someone who sees me as an equal, who respects what I do and supports my ambitions. I want someone who can make me laugh, who I can be completely myself around without feeling like I have to perform or be someone I'm not. I want someone who's emotionally available, who can communicate, who doesn't play games or make me guess what they're feeling. And I want someone who wants to build something with me, not just fall into a relationship because it's convenient, but actively choose each other every day." Diego nodded slowly. "That's a good answer. Honest. What about you? What do you want?" "Same things, really. I'm at a point in my life where I'm not interested in casual anymore. I've done the casual thing, the non-committal thing, and it's empty. I want something real. Someone I can build a life with, plan a future with. Someone who gets that relationships take work but are worth the work. Someone who's my partner in every sense of the word." "Have you found that before?" "Honestly, no. I've had good relationships, but there's always been something missing. Either I wasn't fully invested, or they weren't, or the timing was wrong, or we wanted different things. But I haven't given up on it existing." They sat there for a while longer, talking about their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Diego talked about eventually wanting to start his own construction company, about his vision of building sustainable, affordable housing in underserved communities. Sarah talked about her dream of opening a creative studio, a space where she could not only do her own design work, but also offer classes, host workshops, build a community of artists and creatives. At some point, Diego reached over and took her hand. It was such a simple gesture, but it sent a thrill through Sarah's entire body. His hand was warm, his fingers laced through hers easily, and it felt right in a way that made her heart beat faster. When he finally drove her home around midnight, he walked her to her door, because of course he did. And when he said goodnight, he leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull back if she wanted to. She didn't want to. The kiss was soft, sweet, perfect. Not too aggressive, not too timid. Just right. When he pulled back, he was smiling. "I had a really great time tonight," he said. "Me too." "Can I see you again? Soon?" "I'd like that." "How about Saturday? There's a farmer's market in Little Italy in the morning, and then we could walk around, grab lunch, maybe check out some of the galleries in the area?" "That sounds perfect." He kissed her one more time, then waited until she was inside before walking back to his car. Sarah watched from her window as he drove away, and she was already smiling. This, she thought, might be the beginning of something really good. And for the first year, it absolutely was. The first year of their relationship was everything Sarah had hoped for and more. Diego was attentive, affectionate, thoughtful in ways that made her feel valued and seen. He wasn't just going through the motions of being in a relationship. He was present, engaged, genuinely interested in building something with her. They fell into a comfortable routine. Diego would come over to Sarah's apartment a few nights a week after work, and they'd cook dinner together. He taught her how to make traditional Brazilian dishes: feijoada, pão de queijo, brigadeiros. She introduced him to her favorite recipes: her grandmother's lasagna, Thai curry from scratch, homemade pizza with fresh mozzarella. Cooking together became one of their favorite things to do. They'd open a bottle of wine, put on music, and spend hours in her small kitchen, laughing when something went wrong, celebrating when something turned out perfectly. Diego was patient when she messed up, encouraging when she was trying something new, and he was genuinely impressed by her skills, always complimenting her food, always making her feel like she was talented in ways beyond just her design work. They spent weekends exploring San Diego together. Diego had lived in the city for over a decade, but there were still neighborhoods and restaurants and hidden spots he'd never been to. Sarah, who'd grown up here, loved playing tour guide, taking him to her favorite bookshop in North Park, the best taco shop in Barrio Logan, the hidden beach in La Jolla where you could watch the seals sunbathe on the rocks. They went to concerts, small venue shows where they'd stand in the back, his arms wrapped around her from behind, swaying to the music. They went to movies, sometimes big blockbusters in packed theaters, sometimes independent films at the art house cinema where they'd be 2 of maybe 10 people in the audience. They went hiking in the mountains east of the city, camping at Anza Borrego where the stars were so bright it looked like you could reach up and touch them. Diego met her parents 3 months into the relationship. Sarah had been nervous about it. Her parents were kind but protective, and they'd seen her go through enough mediocre relationships that they'd become a little skeptical of anyone new she brought around. But Diego charmed them effortlessly. He showed up with flowers for her mother and a nice bottle of wine for her father. He offered to help with dinner, insisting on doing the dishes afterward. He asked Sarah's dad about his teaching, genuinely interested in hearing about the challenges and rewards of working in public education. He complimented Sarah's mom on the boutique, asking thoughtful questions about how she'd built her business. After dinner, when Sarah walked Diego out to his car, her mom pulled her aside and said, "I like him. He seems genuine. And more importantly, I like the way he looks at you, like you're the only person in the room." Her dad, who was usually more reserved in his judgments, just gave her a hug and said, "He treats you well. That's what matters." Sarah met Diego's family too, his mother and his younger sister. They welcomed her with open arms, literally. Brazilian culture was much more physically affectionate than what Sarah was used to, and she had to adjust to being kissed on both cheeks, to being pulled into hugs, to the way they'd touch her arm or her shoulder when they talked. Diego's mother, Maria, was a force of nature, warm, loud, funny, and an incredible cook. She insisted on making a huge spread of food for Sarah's first visit, and she kept piling more on Sarah's plate despite Sarah's protest that she was full. "You're too skinny," Maria said, even though Sarah was perfectly healthy. "Diego, you need to feed your girlfriend better." His sister Anna was in her mid-20s working as a nurse. She was funny and blunt in a way that Sarah immediately appreciated. At one point during that first visit, while Diego was in the kitchen helping his mother with dessert, Anna leaned over and said quietly, "He really likes you, you know. I haven't seen him this happy in a long time. Don't break his heart." "I won't," Sarah promised. "Good, because if you do, I know where you live," Anna said with a perfectly straight face, then burst out laughing at Sarah's expression. "I'm kidding!" Mostly. Everything felt easy with Diego. Natural. Right. They had their own lives. Sarah still worked from home building her design business. Diego still had his job and his friends. But they made time for each other without it feeling like a burden or an obligation. They could spend hours together without running out of things to talk about. But they were also comfortable with silence, with just existing in the same space while they each did their own thing. He supported her work in ways that felt genuine. When she landed a big project, redesigning the branding for a local brewery that would significantly boost her portfolio and her income, he took her out to celebrate, genuinely excited for her success. When she struggled with a difficult client who kept changing their mind and demanding revisions without wanting to pay for them, He listened to her vent, offered advice, helped her craft an email setting better boundaries. She supported him, too. When he was stressed about a project at work that was going over budget and behind schedule, she'd give him space when he needed it and comfort when he asked for it. When he talked about his dream of starting his own company someday, she didn't dismiss it as unrealistic. She helped him think through the practical steps, the timeline, the financial planning. They talked about the future, not in a heavy, pressured way, but casually, naturally. Conversations about where they might want to live someday, about what kind of home they'd want, about how many kids they thought they wanted. Sarah had always thought she wanted 2, maybe 3. Diego said he'd love a big family. "I'm used to chaos," he joked. "Brazilian families are never quiet." About 8 months in, they took their first trip together, a long weekend to San Francisco. They stayed in a tiny Airbnb in the Mission District, spent their days walking the city, riding cable cars like tourists, eating their way through the ferry-building marketplace. They got caught in a sudden rainstorm in Golden Gate Park and had to huddle under a tree, laughing as they got soaked. They watched the sunset from Crissy Beach, wrapped in a blanket they'd brought, Diego's arms around her, and Sarah remembers thinking, "This is it. This is the kind of love I've been looking for." On their last night in San Francisco, they splurged on a nice dinner at a restaurant overlooking the bay. The food was incredible, the wine was perfect, and as they shared dessert, some elaborate chocolate thing that was almost too pretty to eat, Diego reached across the table and took her hand. "I love you," he said. "I know we haven't said it yet, and maybe it's too soon, but I do. I love you, and I wanted you to know." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too. I have for a while now, actually. I was just waiting for the right moment to say it." "Is this the right moment?" "It's perfect." They said "I love you" a lot after that. Not in a way that made the words lose their meaning, but in a way that felt like a constant affirmation. "I love you" in the morning when they woke up together. "I love you" before they hung up the phone. "I love you" whispered in the dark before they fell asleep. "I love you" said spontaneously, in the middle of cooking dinner or watching a movie, just because the feeling welled up and needed to be expressed. By the time they hit their 1-year anniversary, Sarah was more in love with Diego than she'd ever been with anyone, and she was starting to think about forever. They celebrated their anniversary at the same Brazilian restaurant where they'd had their first date. Diego had made a reservation, and the owners recognized them. They'd been there enough times over the past year that they'd become regulars. Maria, the owner, gave them a bottle of wine on the house to celebrate love. After dinner, Diego suggested they go back to that spot in the hills, the overlook where he'd taken her on their first date. They drove up the winding roads, parked at the familiar spot, walked the now familiar trail. The view was just as spectacular as it had been a year ago, but now it was layered with memory, with significance. They sat on their rock, looking out over the city, and Diego pulled out a small box from his pocket. For a wild, heart-stopping second, Sarah thought it might be a ring. But when he opened it, it was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small pendant in the shape of Brazil. "I wanted to give you something that represents where I come from," he said as he fastened it around her neck. "You've become such an important part of my life, and my heritage, my culture, that's a part of me. I want you to carry a piece of that with you." Sarah was crying, happy tears, moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's beautiful. Thank you." "Thank you for the best year of my life," Diego said, kissing her. "Here's to many more." "Many more," Sarah echoed, and she meant it. She was thinking marriage, thinking children, thinking forever. She was thinking this was the man she was going to build her life with. She had no idea that cracks were already forming in the foundation, that beneath the surface of this beautiful relationship, something dark was taking root, that the man she loved, the man she trusted with her heart and her future, was already planning how to use her. Years 2 and 3 of their relationship continued much in the same vein as the first year, at least on the surface. They moved in together about 18 months in. Diego's lease was up, and it seemed like the natural next step. They found a 2-bedroom apartment in North Park, close to Sarah's favorite coffee shop and a short drive to Diego's work. Moving in together brought a new level of intimacy to their relationship. It wasn't just about spending nights together anymore. It was about building a shared life, combining their furniture, deciding whose stuff to keep and whose to get rid of, figuring out how to share space with someone who had different habits and routines. Sarah learned that Diego was messy, not catastrophically so, but he had a habit of leaving his shoes in the middle of the floor, throwing his jacket over the back of a chair instead of hanging it up, accumulating coffee mugs on his bedside table. She learned that he took forever in the bathroom in the morning and used way too much hot water in the shower. She learned that he snored when he slept on his back and that he set 3 alarms every morning but didn't actually get up until the 4th or 5th. Diego learned that Sarah was a morning person who woke up ready to talk and be productive, while he needed at least 20 minutes and a cup of coffee before he was capable of conversation. He learned that she was particular about kitchen organization. Everything had its place, and it genuinely stressed her out when things were put back in the wrong spot. He learned that she needed alone time to recharge, especially after intense workdays, and that when she said she needed space, it wasn't personal. They had their first real fights after moving in together. Nothing major, just the inevitable friction that comes from learning to live with another person. Amounts about household chores, about whose turn it was to grocery shop, about the fact that Sarah felt like she was doing most of the cleaning while Diego seemed oblivious to mess. But they worked through it. They learned to communicate better, to express frustration before it turned into resentment, to divide responsibilities in a way that felt fair. They learned each other's love languages. Sarah showed love through acts of service, Diego through physical touch. They learned how to fight productively, to address issues without letting them escalate into blowout arguments. And there were so many good moments that outweighed the challenges. Lazy Sunday mornings in bed, drinking coffee and reading the paper, cooking elaborate dinners together and inviting friends over, decorating for holidays, their first Christmas in their own place. They went a little overboard with decorations and spent an entire weekend making the apartment festive. Movie nights on the couch with takeout and too much wine. Inside jokes that accumulated over time. References and moments that were theirs alone. Sarah's design business continued to grow. She landed bigger clients, raised her rates, got to the point where she was actually turning down work because she was fully booked. It was everything she'd worked for: financial stability, creative fulfillment, the freedom to choose her projects and her schedule. Diego's career was going well too. He got promoted to senior project manager, which came with a significant raise and more responsibility. He was managing bigger projects, leading larger teams. He talked more seriously about eventually starting his own firm, and with Sarah's encouragement, he even started taking some business classes at night to learn about entrepreneurship. They went on more trips together, a week in New York City where they did all the tourist things, saw a Broadway show, ate their way through every borough, visited museums until their feet hurt. A long weekend in Portland with Jessica and her boyfriend, where they ate too much food truck food and explored the city's coffee culture. Another trip to Brazil to visit Diego's extended family, where Sarah practiced her very basic Portuguese and was treated like already part of the family. They talked about marriage more openly now, It wasn't an if, it was a when. Sarah's friends started asking when he was going to propose. Her mom would drop hints about grandchildren. It felt inevitable, just a matter of timing. But looking back, Sarah realizes that's when the relationship started to change in ways she didn't recognize at the time. Diego became more distracted. He was on his phone more, always scrolling, always texting, always seeming to be communicating with someone. When she asked who he was talking to, he'd say it was work stuff, or his buddy Carlos, or his sister. And she believed him, because why wouldn't she? He started working later more often, staying at the office until 7, 8, sometimes 9 at night, coming home exhausted, too tired to talk, just wanting to eat dinner and zone out in front of the TV. When Sarah asked about the long hours, he'd say they were understaffed, that there was a big project with a tight deadline, that it was temporary and things would calm down soon. They had sex less often. Not dramatically less. It wasn't like their physical relationship disappeared. But where they used to be intimate several times a week, it dropped to once a week, then maybe twice a month. When Sarah tried to initiate, Diego would often claim he was too tired or stressed. And again, it seemed reasonable. He was working a lot. He was stressed. These things happen in long-term relationships. He became more secretive about his phone. It was always face down now. He started taking it with him everywhere, even just to the bathroom or to get a glass of water. If she picked it up to hand it to him, he'd tense up slightly. Just a micro-expression that passed quickly, but that something in Sarah's subconscious registered. His visa situation came up more often in conversation. He'd mention, seemingly casually, that his work visa was going to expire eventually, that the process for renewing was expensive and complicated, that his company was dragging their feet on sponsoring his green card application, that he was stressed about his immigration status, about the possibility of having to leave the country he now considered home. Sarah was sympathetic. She couldn't imagine how stressful it must be to live with that kind of uncertainty, to always be one policy change or paperwork issue away from having to leave everything you'd built. She reassured him that they'd figure it out, that there were options, that she was there for him through whatever challenges came up. She didn't realize, couldn't have realized, that he was setting the stage, planting seeds, building a narrative that would make what came next seem inevitable, even necessary. Around the 3-year mark, Sarah started bringing up marriage more directly. Not in a pushy way, but in a, where are we headed kind of way. They'd been together for 3 years, living together for over a year. They were both in their late 20s. Sarah was 28, Diego was 29. It seemed like a reasonable time to start having serious conversations about next steps. But every time she brought it up, Diego deflected. He'd say things like, "I want to marry you, of course I do, but let's wait until my work situation is more stable." Or, "I want to be able to afford the kind of wedding and ring you deserve, and I'm not there yet financially." Or, "Can we just enjoy what we have right now without rushing into anything?" And those all seemed like reasonable concerns. So Sarah backed off. She didn't want to be the nagging girlfriend pressuring her boyfriend into a proposal he wasn't ready for. She told herself to be patient, that he'd propose when the time was right for him, that the relationship was solid and the rest would follow naturally. Meanwhile, Diego's behavior became even more erratic. He'd have days where he was his old self, attentive, affectionate, present, and then he'd have weeks where he seemed checked out, distant, like his mind was always somewhere else. He picked fights over stupid things. He'd get irritated about dishes in the sink, about Sarah's work materials spread across the dining table, about her wanting to have dinner with her parents on a weekend when he wanted to just stay home. The fights never lasted long. He'd always apologize, claim he was stressed about work, promise to do better. And Sarah, because she loved him, because she was invested in making this work, because 3 years felt like too much to throw away over some rough patches, forgave him, made excuses for him, convinced herself that every relationship went through hard periods, that this was just a phase they needed to weather together. She talked to Jessica about it over coffee one afternoon, about 6 months before everything fell apart. "I don't know," Sarah said, stirring her latte absently. "Things just feel off lately. I can't put my finger on it exactly, but something's changed." "Off how?" Jessica asked. "He's distant, distracted, always on his phone. We barely have sex anymore. When I try to talk to him about the future, he shuts down. I feel like I'm living with a roommate more than a boyfriend sometimes." "Have you told him this?" "I've tried, but every time I bring it up, he says he's just stressed about work, that it's temporary, that things will get better. And then they do get better for a few days or a week, and I think maybe I was just overreacting. But then it goes back to feeling weird again." Jessica was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something? And I don't want you to get mad." "Okay." "Do you think he might be cheating?" Sarah's first instinct was to say no. Absolutely not. Diego would never. But Jessica's question forced her to actually think about it. The long work hours, the phone secrecy, the decreased intimacy, the emotional distance. "I don't know," she finally said quietly. "I don't want to believe he would, but honestly, I don't know anymore." "Have you looked at his phone? Checked his messages?" "No, I'm not that person. I don't snoop. Either I trust him or I don't, right?" "Sarah, if you're already at the point where you're questioning whether you can trust him, the trust is already broken. Looking at his phone isn't creating a problem that doesn't exist. It's confirming or denying a problem that you already sense is there." But Sarah couldn't bring herself to do it. Looking through his phone felt like a violation, felt like admitting that their relationship had deteriorated to a point she wasn't ready to acknowledge. So she pushed the concerns down, told herself she was being paranoid, tried to focus on the good moments and ignore the bad ones. 3 months later, she found out she was pregnant. It wasn't planned. They'd been careful. Sarah was on birth control. They used protection. But nothing's 100% effective, and somehow, against the odds, it happened. Sarah took the test on a Saturday morning while Diego was at the gym. She'd been feeling off for a couple of weeks. Exhausted, nauseous, her period was late. She'd convinced herself it was just stress. Maybe she was coming down with something. But when she was 2 weeks late, she finally bought a pregnancy test. She sat on the bathroom floor, watching the test develop, and when those 2 pink lines appeared, her entire world shifted. She was 28. They'd been together for 3 years. They lived together, talked about marriage and future children. This wasn't the worst thing that could happen, but it wasn't the best either. Because she'd always imagined getting pregnant after they were married, after they'd made that formal commitment to each other. She'd imagined it being something they planned, something they decided together when they were both ready. This felt different, unplanned, complicated. She was also acutely aware that their relationship had been rocky lately. Was bringing a baby into this situation the right move? Would this fix things or make them worse? But beneath all the worry and uncertainty, there was something else. Excitement. She was going to be a mom. They were going to have a baby. And despite everything, despite the complications and the concerns, that felt like something beautiful. When Diego got home from the gym, she was waiting for him on the couch, the pregnancy test wrapped in tissue paper in a small box. "I have something to show you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. He sat down next to her, clearly picking up on her nervous energy. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think anything's wrong. It's just unexpected." She handed him the box. He opened it, pulled out the test, stared at it for a long moment. Sarah watched his face carefully, trying to read his reaction. He looked up at her, and there was something in his expression, something she couldn't quite identify. Surprise, yes, but also something else, something that looked almost like panic. But then he smiled, pulled her into a hug, said all the right things. "This is amazing. We're going to be parents. I love you so much." And Sarah, desperate to believe that everything was going to be okay, chose to focus on his words rather than that fleeting expression she'd seen. Chose to believe that the panic was just normal shock at unexpected news, that the hesitation was just him processing. She chose to believe in the version of him she'd fallen in love with, rather than the version she'd been seeing lately. It was the biggest mistake she would make, because that pregnancy test didn't bring them closer together. It didn't fix the problems in their relationship. It didn't make Diego more present or more committed. Instead, it set in motion a series of events that would expose everything, that would reveal the truth she'd been trying so hard not to see, that would show her that the man she loved, the man she'd given 3 years of her life to, had been using her all along. The first few weeks after finding out about the pregnancy were surreal. Sarah went to her first doctor's appointment, where they confirmed she was about 6 weeks along. They gave her prenatal vitamins, a list of foods to avoid, information about what to expect in the coming months. She left the appointment with an ultrasound photo, just a tiny blob on the screen, but it was their baby, and seeing it made everything feel suddenly very real. Diego went with her to that first appointment. He held her hand in the waiting room, asked questions when the doctor explained things, looked at the ultrasound screen with what seemed like genuine wonder. For a moment, Sarah thought maybe this was the turning point. Maybe the baby would be the thing that brought them back together, that reminded them of why they'd fallen in love in the first place. But as soon as they left the doctor's office, it was like a switch flipped. Diego became distracted again, checking his phone, his mind clearly somewhere else. When Sarah tried to talk to him about baby names or nursery ideas, he'd give non-committal responses. "We have time. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We should focus on one thing at a time." His long work hours didn't change. If anything, they got longer. There were nights he wouldn't come home until 10 or 11, when Sarah was already in bed, exhausted from early pregnancy fatigue. She'd wake up when he came in, and he'd claim he'd lost track of time, that the project deadlines were insane right now, that he was sorry. She started feeling sick, the morning sickness that's somehow worse than anyone describes it. She'd spend mornings hunched over the toilet, barely able to keep anything down. She'd call Diego at work, hoping for some sympathy or support, and he'd say the right things. "I'm so sorry you're feeling bad. Can I bring you anything on my way home?" But there was a hollowness to it, like he was reading from a script rather than actually being present with her. Her friends were excited about the baby. Jessica immediately started planning a baby shower, sending Sarah links to adorable nursery themes and tiny baby clothes. Sarah's mom was over the moon. This would be her first grandchild. She started knitting baby blankets and talking about all the things she wanted to teach her grandchild. But when Sarah tried to share her excitement with Diego, to show him the cute onesies she'd found online, or to discuss baby gear they'd need to buy, he seemed almost annoyed, like she was bothering him with trivial details when he had more important things to worry about. "Can we talk about this later?" he'd say. "I have a lot on my mind right now." "What's going on?" Sarah would ask. "Talk to me. We're supposed to be in this together." "It's just work stuff and immigration stuff. My visa situation is getting more complicated, and I'm stressed about it. Have you talked to your company about sponsoring your green card?" They're dragging their feet. It's expensive for them, and with the current administration cracking down on immigration, they're being cautious. I might need to look at other options. "What other options?" But he'd always deflect, change the subject, say he didn't want to talk about it right now. Looking back, Sarah realizes those conversations were him testing the waters, planting seeds, setting up the justification for what he was planning to do. At 10 weeks, Sarah had her second ultrasound. This time, you could actually see the baby's shape: head, body, tiny limbs. The technician pointed out the heartbeat, strong and steady. Sarah cried, overwhelmed with emotion and hormones and the reality of what was happening inside her body. Diego was supposed to be at that appointment. He'd promised he would be there. But at the last minute, he texted that something had come up at work, that he was sorry, that he'd make the next one. Sarah went alone, sat in the waiting room surrounded by couples, expectant fathers holding their partners' hands, asking excited questions, looking at ultrasound photos with pride. She felt the absence of Diego like a physical ache. Afterward, she sent him the ultrasound photo. He responded 3 hours later with, "That's great, babe. Sorry I missed it." That's when the resentment started to build. Up until that point, Sarah had been making excuses for him, telling herself he was just stressed, that he'd step up when the baby actually arrived. But missing that appointment, the casual dismissal of something so significant, it hurt in a way that was hard to rationalize away. She confronted him that night when he came home around 9. "We need to talk." "About what?" He headed straight for the fridge, grabbing a beer. "About the fact that you're completely checked out of this pregnancy. I'm doing this alone, Diego. You're physically here, but you're not present. What's going on?" He sighed, like she was being unreasonable. "I told you. I'm dealing with a lot right now. Work is insane, my visa situation is stressing me out, and I'm pregnant with your child. I'm sick every morning. I'm exhausted all the time. I'm scared about becoming a parent. And I need you to be here with me. Not physically in the apartment, but actually present, actually engaged." "I'm doing the best I can." "Are you, though? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're avoiding me, avoiding this whole situation." "That's not fair." "What's not fair is me going to ultrasounds alone. What's not fair is you working 12-hour days suddenly when you didn't before I got pregnant. What's not fair is you acting like this baby is my problem to deal with instead of something we're doing together." They argued for an hour, the kind of circular argument where you keep saying the same things in different ways and never actually reach a resolution. Diego insisted he was stressed, that he was doing his best, that Sarah was being too demanding. Sarah insisted that she wasn't asking for anything unreasonable, just basic partnership and presence. Eventually, exhausted and emotionally drained, Sarah went to bed. Diego stayed up, and she could hear him on his phone in the living room, his voice too low for her to make out words, but the tone suggesting he was talking to someone, venting, seeking sympathy. From who? She wondered. Who was he talking to at 11 o'clock at night? But she was too tired to investigate, too tired to fight anymore. She fell asleep alone, one hand on her growing belly, feeling more isolated than she'd felt since this whole thing started. The next morning, Diego was different, warmer, more attentive. He made her breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, plain and simple because anything more adventurous made her nauseous. He apologized for the night before, said he knew he'd been distant, promised to do better. "I'm scared too," he admitted. "I'm scared about being a father, about being responsible for another human being. But you're right. I need to be here for you. For both of you." Sarah wanted so badly to believe him. So she did. For about a week, things were better. Diego came home at reasonable hours. He asked how she was feeling. He looked at baby stuff online with her, expressed opinions about strollers and car seats. He came to the next doctor's appointment, where they heard the heartbeat through a Doppler, and the doctor assured them everything was progressing normally. But then he slipped back into his old patterns. The late nights, the phone secrecy, the emotional distance. And Sarah started to realize that the week of good behavior hadn't been a turning point. It had been an anomaly. A brief performance to get her off his back before he went right back to whatever he'd been doing before. She was 14 weeks pregnant when her suspicions became impossible to ignore. She was home working on a design project when she realized she'd left her laptop charger at the office, a co-working space she rented a desk at a few times a week when she needed to get out of the apartment. Diego was at work, but she knew he had the same brand of laptop. His charger would work for hers. She found his laptop in his backpack in the bedroom. She plugged it in, intending to just borrow the charger and put it back. But the laptop was open, still logged in, and there on the screen was his email inbox. She didn't mean to look. Or maybe she did. Maybe some part of her had been waiting for an opportunity like this, an excuse to confirm the suspicion she'd been trying to ignore. The most recent email was from someone named Camilla. The subject line was, "Missing you." Sarah's hands started shaking. She shouldn't read it. It was an invasion of privacy. But she also needed to know. She clicked on the email. "Hey, babe. I know you said we needed to cool things down for a while, but I miss you so much. When can I see you again? I understand your situation is complicated right now, but I'm willing to wait. I know we're meant to be together. Love you. C." Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen, rereading the email over and over, like maybe she'd misunderstood. But there was no misunderstanding. "Babe, love you. When can I see you again?" Diego was cheating on her. Her hands moved almost on autopilot, clicking through his emails. There were more from Camila, months worth, going back almost a year. Flirty messages, explicit messages, plans to meet up, photos. And there were messages from other women, too. Someone named Jessica, not her Jessica, a different one. Someone named Tatiana. All recent, all suggestive, all clear evidence that Diego had been seeing multiple women while living with her, while planning a future with her, while she was carrying his child. Sarah's vision blurred with tears. She felt nauseous, but not from morning sickness, betrayal, from shock, from the complete destruction of everything she thought she knew about her life. She kept clicking, kept reading, unable to stop even though every new email felt like a knife twisting deeper. And that's when she found the emails to the immigration attorney. The subject line of the first one was, "Marriage-based green card application." Sarah clicked it with trembling hands. "Dear Mr. Rodriguez, I am writing to inquire about the process for obtaining a green card through marriage to a U.S. citizen. My current work visa expires in 8 months, and my employer has indicated they will not sponsor a green card application. I am in a long-term relationship with an American citizen, and we are expecting a child together. What would be the timeline and requirements for a marriage-based application? Please advise on next steps. Best regards, Diego Silva." The email was dated 2 months ago. 2 months after Sarah had gotten pregnant. She scrolled through the thread. The attorney had responded with detailed information about the process, the documentation required, the timeline. Diego had asked follow-up questions, specifically about whether the marriage needed to be established before the child was born, whether having a child together strengthened the case for a legitimate marriage. The attorney's response had been clear. Having a child together is certainly evidence of a genuine relationship, but USCIS will still conduct interviews to ensure the marriage is not solely for immigration purposes. It's important that you can demonstrate a bona fide marriage, shared finances, shared residence, photographs together, testimony from friends and family, etc. Diego's next email had asked, "What happens if we get married and then later divorce? Would that affect my status?" The attorney. If you obtain conditional permanent residence through marriage and then divorce within the 2-year conditional period, you would need to file for a waiver. If you can prove the marriage was entered into in good faith, even if it didn't work out, your status can still be adjusted to permanent residence. However, if USCIS determines the marriage was fraudulent from the beginning, your application would be denied, and you could face deportation and be barred from future immigration benefits. Diego. Understood. What if the marriage lasts beyond the 2-year period and we get divorced after I receive permanent residence? Would that be an issue? The attorney. Once you have permanent residence, green card, marriage and divorce no longer affect your immigration status, as long as USCIS is satisfied that the original marriage was bona fide. The conversation went on, Diego asking detailed questions about timelines, about requirements, about how to ensure his application would be successful. And nowhere in any of those emails did he mention love or commitment, or actually wanting to marry Sarah for any reason other than securing his immigration status. Sarah sat there on the bed, Diego's laptop in front of her, reading through months of evidence that her entire relationship had been a lie. He'd been cheating on her with at least 3 women for at least a year. He'd gotten her pregnant, and whether that was accidental or intentional, she'd never know, but he'd seen it as an opportunity, a way to strengthen his case for a marriage-based green card. He'd been planning to propose not because he loved her, not because he wanted to build a life with her, but because he needed her citizenship, needed her to be his ticket to staying in the country. Every conversation they'd had about the future, every time he'd deflected questions about marriage, every instance of him being distant or distracted, it all made sense now. He'd been calculating, weighing his options, figuring out how to use her most effectively. The pregnancy hadn't brought them together. It had accelerated his timeline, made him realize he needed to lock this down before she figured out what he was doing and left. Sarah didn't know how long she sat there, staring at the screen, her mind trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. Minutes? Hours? Time felt meaningless. She heard the front door open. Diego was home. She quickly closed the laptop, her heart racing. She didn't know what to do. Confront him now? Pretend she didn't know? Gather more evidence? He walked into the bedroom, saw her sitting there with tears streaming down her face, and his expression changed immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked. And God, even now, even in this moment, he was performing, acting concerned. She looked up at him, this man she'd loved, this man she'd trusted, this man whose child she was carrying, and she barely recognized him. How had she never seen it? How had she been so blind? "Who's Camila?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tears. His face went pale. For a second, just a second, she saw panic flash across his features. Then he tried to compose himself, tried to figure out his next move. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me. Not now. Not anymore." She gestured to his laptop. "I saw the emails. All of them. Camila, Jessica, Tatiana, the immigration attorney. I know everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Diego stood there, frozen, clearly trying to decide whether to deny, to deflect, to minimize. She watched him calculate, watched him try to find an angle. And that's when she knew, when she really, truly knew, that nothing he'd ever said to her had been real. "Sarah, don't." She held up her hand. "Don't you dare try to explain this away. Don't tell me it's not what it looks like. Don't insult my intelligence any more than you already have." "I was going to tell you." "Tell me what? That you've been cheating on me for a year? That you've been planning to marry me just to get a green card? That everything about our relationship has been a lie?" Her voice rose, all the pain and rage she'd been holding back pouring out. "It's not all a lie." "Then what part was real, Diego? Tell me, which parts were actually real and which parts were you using me?" He didn't answer, couldn't answer, because they both knew the truth. She stood up, feeling unsteady, one hand instinctively going to her belly. She was 16 weeks pregnant, showing now, carrying the child of a man who'd never actually loved her. "I want you out," she said quietly. "Sarah, please, we need to talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about. You used me. You lied to me. You betrayed me in every possible way. And I'm done. I'm done with you, I'm done with this relationship, and I'm done believing anything you say." "What about the baby?" "What about the baby? You clearly don't care about this baby. You only care about yourself, about what you can get from me." "That's not true, isn't it? You've missed appointments. You've been absent throughout this entire pregnancy. You've been out there sleeping with other women while I've been home, sick and scared and alone. You don't get to suddenly pretend you care about this baby when it's convenient for your immigration case." Diego's expression hardened. The mask of concern dropped, and for the first time she saw him clearly, saw the coldness beneath the charm. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low. "Think about what you're doing. You're pregnant. You need support. Are you really going to do this alone?" "Better alone than with someone who sees me as nothing more than a tool." "I never said." "You didn't have to say it. I read the emails, Diego. I know exactly what I am to you. A means to an end. A way to get your green card. And you know what the saddest part is? I loved you. I really, truly loved you. I would have done anything for you. And you threw that away because you're too selfish to actually care about anyone but yourself." She pushed past him, grabbing her phone and keys. She needed to get out of this apartment, away from him, somewhere she could breathe. "Where are you going?" he called after her. "Somewhere you're not." She left the apartment, got in her car, and drove. She didn't have a destination in mind, just needed to move, to put distance between herself and the man who'd just destroyed her entire world. She ended up at Jessica's house, showing up unannounced, tears streaming down her face. Jessica took one look at her and pulled her inside without a word. And for the first time since reading those emails, Sarah let herself completely fall apart. Jessica didn't ask questions at first. She just held Sarah while she sobbed, brought her tissues, made her tea that Sarah didn't drink. They sat on Jessica's couch for what felt like hours, Sarah crying until she had no tears left, until she was just sitting there, numb and empty. Finally, when the worst of the storm had passed, Jessica said quietly, "Tell me what happened." So Sarah did. She told her everything. The emails from the other women, the correspondence with the immigration attorney, the calculation behind the proposal that hadn't even happened yet, the realization that the past 3 years had been built on lies and manipulation. "I'm so sorry," Jessica said when Sarah finished. "I'm so sorry. I knew something was off, but I never imagined this." "How did I not see it?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "How was I so stupid?" "You weren't stupid. You were in love. And people who manipulate, they're good at it. They make you doubt your own instincts. They make you feel crazy for questioning things. This isn't your fault. I'm 16 weeks pregnant with his baby. How am I supposed to do this?" One day at a time. 1 hour at a time if that's all you can manage. But first things first, you're not going back to that apartment tonight. You're staying here. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. Sarah's phone had been buzzing continuously. Diego, calling, texting, leaving voicemails. She finally turned it off, unable to handle hearing his voice, seeing his name pop up on her screen. She slept in Jessica's guest room that night, or tried to sleep. Mostly, she lay awake, one hand on her belly, feeling the baby move, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The next morning, she turned her phone back on to dozens of messages from Diego. She made herself read them, each one making her angrier than the last. "Sarah, please, we need to talk about this. You're overreacting. I know I made mistakes, but throwing away 3 years over this is insane. Think about the baby. Our baby needs both parents. You're being emotional. Let's talk when you've calmed down. I love you. Please come home." Every message was manipulation. Blame shifting, minimizing, guilt tripping. Not once did he take actual responsibility. Not once did he acknowledge the full scope of what he'd done. She responded with a single text. "I need you out of the apartment by the end of the week. We'll figure out how to split our stuff later. Don't contact me again unless it's about logistics." His response came immediately. "You can't just kick me out. It's my apartment too." Sarah's hands shook with rage as she typed back. "The lease is in my name. You're not on it. You have no legal right to be there. If you're not out by Friday, I'll have the locks changed and your stuff will be on the curb." She didn't wait for his response. She blocked his number. Over the next few days, Sarah stayed with Jessica while she figured out her next steps. She called her parents and told them everything. Her mother cried. Her father was furious, wanted to drive over and confront Diego himself. But Sarah asked them not to, said she needed to handle this her own way. She talked to a lawyer friend about her rights, both regarding the apartment and regarding custody once the baby was born. The lawyer assured her that since the lease was in her name, she was within her rights to ask him to leave. As for custody, that would be determined later, but being unmarried gave her certain advantages in terms of primary custody. She also asked about Diego's immigration situation. If he was planning to marry you specifically for a green card, that's immigration fraud. You could report it. Would that affect anything? The baby? Custody? Not directly. Immigration status and custody are separate legal matters, but it would likely result in him facing deportation proceedings, which could obviously impact his ability to be present for the child. Sarah filed that information away. She wasn't sure yet what she wanted to do with it. Part of her wanted him to face consequences. Another part of her worried about making her child's father disappear entirely from their life. On Friday, she returned to the apartment. Diego's stuff was mostly gone. He'd taken his clothes, his laptop, his personal items. But he'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "Sarah, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I made terrible mistakes. I was selfish, and I hurt you, and I'm sorry. But I want you to know that not everything was fake. I do care about you. I do care about our baby. And I want to be part of our child's life, even if you don't want me in yours. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here. D." She crumpled up the note and threw it away. His apologies were too little, too late. And his claim that not everything was fake? She didn't believe him. Couldn't believe him. How could she ever trust anything he said again? The apartment felt different without his presence. Quieter, emptier, but also somehow lighter, like a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying was finally gone. She threw herself into preparing for single motherhood. She converted the second bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow, assembling the crib and changing table herself, even though it took her twice as long as it should have. She bought baby clothes, bottles, diapers. She read parenting books and joined online forums for single mothers. Her friends and family rallied around her. Her parents helped financially, insisting on paying for the bigger items like the crib and stroller. Jessica threw her a baby shower with just close friends and family. Nothing fancy, just an afternoon of food and games and support. Her sister flew in from Seattle for a long weekend to help finish setting up the nursery. But despite all the support, Sarah felt profoundly alone. She'd go to prenatal appointments by herself, sitting in waiting rooms full of couples. She'd feel the baby kick and have no one to share the moment with. She'd wake up at 3 in the morning with anxiety about labor, about childbirth, about raising a child alone, with no partner to talk to reassure her. Diego tried to reach out a few times through mutual friends. He wanted to be at the birth, wanted to be involved, wanted to talk about custody arrangements. Sarah ignored it all. She wasn't ready. Might never be ready. At 28 weeks, she had a scare. She started bleeding. Not a lot, but enough to terrify her. She drove herself to the hospital, called her mom from the car, trying to stay calm while panic clawed at her throat. The baby was fine. The bleeding was from a small issue with the placenta, nothing life-threatening, but they kept her overnight for observation. She lay in that hospital bed, alone, feeling the baby move inside her, and thought about how Diego should be here, how the father of this child should be the one sitting in the uncomfortable chair next to the bed, holding her hand, telling her everything would be okay. But he wasn't, and he never would be, because he'd made choices that had led them here, to Sarah alone in a hospital room, to a baby who would grow up with a part-time father at best, to a relationship destroyed beyond repair. She let herself cry that night, not the angry, betrayed tears of the discovery, but sad, grieving tears, mourning the relationship she'd thought they had, mourning the future she'd imagined, mourning the family unit her child would never have. By the time they released her the next day, something had shifted. The sadness was still there, but so was something else. Determination, resolve, a fierce, protective love for the baby inside her that overshadowed everything else. Diego had taken so much from her. He'd taken her trust, her faith in love, 3 years of her life. But he wasn't going to take her strength. He wasn't going to take her future. And he sure as hell wasn't going to take her joy in becoming a mother. She was going to do this. She was going to raise this baby, love this baby, give this baby everything they needed. And she was going to build a life, a good life, a full life, without him. That determination carried her through the rest of the pregnancy, through the final months of discomfort and anxiety, through the childbirth classes she attended alone, practicing breathing techniques with a pillow as her partner, through the moments of fear and doubt that inevitably came. And then, at 39 weeks and 3 days, her water broke. Labor was the hardest thing Sarah had ever done. 16 hours of contractions, of breathing through pain that felt like it was splitting her in half, of nurses checking her dilation and telling her she wasn't ready to push yet, of exhaustion so profound she didn't know how she'd make it through. Her mom was there, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, telling her she was doing great, even when Sarah was cursing and saying she couldn't do this, she couldn't, it was too much. Jessica was there too, having rushed over as soon as Sarah called. She held Sarah's other hand, coached her through contractions, advocated for her with the medical staff when Sarah was too tired to speak up for herself. But there was still that empty space, that absence where Diego should have been. Sarah had sent him a text when labor started. Brief, factual. In labor. Baby will be here soon. I'll let you know when they arrive. She didn't expect him to show up. She'd made it clear she didn't want him at the birth. But some part of her had wondered if he'd try anyway, if he'd show up despite her wishes, claiming he had a right to be there. He didn't. At 6:47 p.m. on a humid August evening, after one final exhausting push, Sarah's daughter entered the world. The doctor placed the baby on Sarah's chest, and time seemed to stop. She was perfect, tiny and red-faced and screaming, but absolutely perfect. She had a full head of dark hair and Diego's nose and Sarah's chin. Her eyes, that newborn blue that would change color in the coming weeks, blinked up at Sarah like she was trying to focus, trying to figure out this bright, strange new world. "Hi, baby girl," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mama. I've been waiting so long to meet you." The baby's crying stopped almost immediately at the sound of Sarah's voice, like she recognized it from months of hearing it from inside the womb. She made a small sound, somewhere between a coo and a sigh, and Sarah felt her heart crack open in a way she'd never experienced before. This was love. Pure, uncomplicated, overwhelming love. Nothing Diego had ever made her feel compared to this. "She's beautiful," her mom said, crying just as hard as Sarah was. "She's perfect," Jessica agreed, taking photos on her phone to capture the moment. They measured her. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, 19 inches long. They checked her over, pronounced her healthy, wrapped her in a blanket, and gave her back to Sarah. "Have you decided on a name?" the nurse asked. Sarah looked down at her daughter, this tiny person who was somehow both a stranger and the most familiar thing in the world. "Sophia," she said. "Sophia Grace." Sophia. Wisdom. Because Sarah hoped this child would grow up wiser than her mother had been, that she'd see through manipulation, trust her instincts, know her worth from the beginning. Grace. Because despite everything, the betrayal, the pain, the struggle, there was grace in this moment, in this new beginning, in the fierce love Sarah felt for this tiny human. She sent Diego a text with a photo. Sophia Grace, born 6:47 p.m., 7 pounds 4 ounces, both healthy. He responded quickly. "She's beautiful. Congratulations. Can I come see her?" Sarah looked at her daughter, sleeping peacefully now in her arms, and felt a surge of protective instinct so strong it was almost primal. "Not yet," she typed back. "I'll let you know when I'm ready." She turned off her phone and focused on Sophia, on memorizing every detail of her face, on the weight of her in Sarah's arms, on the miracle of what her body had just done, of the life she'd just brought into the world. The nurses took Sophia briefly to weigh her again and do some routine credits. Sarah's mom went to get some food. Jessica stepped out to make calls to friends and family who'd been waiting for updates. And for just a moment, Sarah was alone in the hospital room. Her body was exhausted, sore, foreign to her. Her emotions were all over the place. Joy and fear and love and grief all mixed together. The future stretched out in front of her, uncertain and daunting. But as she sat there, waiting for them to bring Sophia back, Sarah realized something. She'd done it. She'd gotten through the pregnancy alone. She'd survived the betrayal, the heartbreak, the complete upheaval of everything she'd thought her life would be. She'd given birth, brought a whole human being into existence, without a partner, without the father of her child. If she could do that, she could do anything. They brought Sophia back, and Sarah held her daughter and whispered promises. "I'm going to give you the best life. You're going to know you're loved every single day. You're going to grow up strong and smart and knowing your worth. And I'm going to show you what it means to choose yourself, to not settle, to demand better. I'm going to show you that we're going to be okay. More than okay." Sophia made a small sound in her sleep, like she heard, like she understood. Sarah stayed in the hospital for 2 days. Diego sent messages every day asking when he could meet Sofia. Sarah ignored most of them. She wasn't being vindictive. She just wasn't ready. She needed this time with her daughter, this bubble of just the two of them, before the complications of custody and co-parenting had to be addressed. When she finally came home with Sofia, her mom driving because Sarah was still too sore and exhausted to feel safe behind the wheel, she felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. This apartment, where she'd lived with Diego, where she'd discovered his betrayal, it was full of ghosts. But it was also where she'd prepared Sofia's nursery, where she'd spent months nesting and preparing for this moment. She carried Sofia inside, placed her gently in the bassinet in the nursery, and stood there watching her sleep. This tiny person who depended completely on Sarah for everything. It was terrifying and beautiful all at once. The first few weeks were brutal. Sofia had her days and nights mixed up, which meant Sarah was awake most of the night, trying to soothe the crying baby, feeding her every 2 hours, changing diapers, rocking her, singing to her. Sarah's mom stayed for the first week, helping with everything, teaching Sarah things about newborn care that all the books and classes hadn't quite covered. But then her mom had to go home, back to her own life and responsibilities, and Sarah was truly alone with Sofia for the first time. Those were the hardest days, when Sofia would cry inconsolably and Sarah couldn't figure out what was wrong. When Sarah hadn't slept more than 2 hours straight in days and felt like she was losing her mind. When she'd sit on the floor of the nursery at 3 a.m, Sofia screaming in her arms, and wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake thinking she could do this alone. But somehow, day by day, she figured it out. She learned Sofia's cries, the hungry cry versus the tired cry versus the "I just need to be held" cry. She learned to sleep whenever Sofia slept, to let the dishes pile up in the sink, to accept help when friends offered to bring meals or hold the baby for an hour so Sarah could shower. And slowly, impossibly, she started to adjust to this new reality, this life where she was no longer just Sarah, but Sofia's mom, where her needs came second to this tiny human's needs, where love was no longer a feeling, but an action, a choice she made every moment of every day. Diego finally met Sofia when she was 3 weeks old. Sarah had put it off as long as she felt she could, but she knew, legally and ethically, she couldn't keep him from his daughter indefinitely, no matter how much she wanted to. They met in a public place, a park near Sarah's apartment, neutral territory. Jessica came with her for moral support, staying a respectful distance away, but close enough to intervene if needed. Sarah saw Diego before he saw her. He was sitting on a bench, looking nervous, checking his phone. And for just a second, she felt a flash of the old feeling, the love, the connection. But it passed quickly, replaced by a cold kind of disgust. This man had used her, lied to her, betrayed her in the worst possible way. The fact that he looked nervous didn't make him sympathetic, it made him pathetic. She walked over, Sofia in her carrier. Diego stood immediately, his eyes going to the baby. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi. Can I—" He gestured to Sofia. Sarah unstrapped the carrier and carefully pulled Sofia out. The baby was awake, her eyes trying to focus, tiny hands waving in the air. Sarah handed her to Diego, watching carefully, ready to take her back at the first sign of incompetence or discomfort. But Diego held her like he knew what he was doing. He cradled her head, supported her body, looked down at her with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. Wonder, maybe, or fear, or guilt. "She's so small," he said. "She's actually pretty average size for her age." "She's beautiful. She looks like you. She has your nose." They stood there awkwardly, this man holding the baby they'd made together, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between them. "Sarah, Don't," she cut him off. "I'm not here for apologies or explanations. I'm here because you have a right to meet your daughter, but that's it. This doesn't change anything between us." "I know, I want to be part of her life. I want to be her father. We'll figure out some kind of custody arrangement, through lawyers, not through us trying to negotiate. But you need to understand, I'm her primary parent. I'm the one who's been here every day, every night. You're going to have to earn any role in her life beyond that." "I understand." He held Sophia for about 15 minutes, and Sarah watched every second, ready to take her back. When Sophia started to fuss, clearly hungry, Sarah reclaimed her daughter and said, "I need to feed her. We're done here." "When can I see her again?" "My lawyer will contact yours with a proposed schedule." She walked away, not looking back, feeling his eyes on her. It should have felt like closure, like crossing some kind of bridge. But it just felt empty, hollow. In the months that followed, they established a custody arrangement. Diego got supervised visits twice a week for a few hours each time. Sarah's mom usually supervised, and she reported back that Diego seemed attentive and careful with Sophia. But there was an awkwardness there, a disconnect, like he was going through the motions of fatherhood without actually feeling it. Sarah continued to navigate single motherhood. The exhaustion was relentless. Sophia was a poor sleeper, waking up multiple times a night even as she got older. Sarah's design work suffered because she couldn't focus, couldn't meet deadlines the way she used to. Money got tight. She dipped into her savings more than she was comfortable with. And through it all, there was the anger. The rage at Diego for what he'd done, for the position he'd put her in. It would hit her at random moments, while she was washing bottles at 2 a.m, while she was trying to soothe a teething baby, while she was sitting alone in her apartment realizing she hadn't had a real conversation with another adult in days. She'd thought the anger would fade with time, but months passed, and if anything, it grew stronger, because she could see now, with distance and clarity, just how calculated his manipulation had been. How he'd isolated her from friends, made her doubt herself, kept her off balance. How he'd used her pregnancy to secure his immigration status, proposing at exactly the moment that would maximize his chances of a successful green card application. And the worst part? He was fine. He'd moved on. He had a new girlfriend, one of the women he'd been cheating with, Camila. They were living together. He'd posted photos on social media of them looking happy, carefree, in love. Meanwhile, Sarah was drowning, exhausted, financially stressed, socially isolated. Raising a baby alone while he got to play part-time dad and otherwise live his life unaffected by the choices he'd made. Where was the justice in that? Where was the karma? Sarah had always believed, on some level, that the universe balanced things out. That people who did terrible things eventually faced consequences. That you reap what you sow. But as months turned into more months, and Sophia grew from a newborn to a baby who could smile and laugh and grab at things, and Diego continued to live his consequence-free life, Sarah started to lose faith in that cosmic justice. Maybe karma wasn't real. Maybe sometimes bad people just got away with being bad, and good people just had to accept it and move on. But Sarah was tired of accepting it, tired of being the victim in this story, tired of watching him live happily while she struggled with the fallout of his choices. And that's when the idea started to form. The idea that would eventually lead to Marcus, to the confrontation, to Diego finally facing even a fraction of what he deserved. But before we get to that, you need to understand just how much Sarah was struggling. Because that context matters. It matters that she'd spent months trying to do the right thing, trying to take the high road, trying to be the bigger person. It matters that she'd given Diego every opportunity to step up, to take responsibility, to show even a hint of genuine remorse. He never did. Sophia's first birthday came and went. Sarah threw a small party, just family and a few close friends. She made a smash cake, decorated with pink and white frosting. She watched her daughter's face light up when everyone sang happy birthday. Watched Sophia dig into the cake with both hands, getting frosting everywhere, laughing with pure, unself-conscious joy. Diego came to the party. Sarah had debated whether to invite him, but ultimately decided that keeping him from his daughter's first birthday would make her the villain in the story, and she refused to give him that. So she invited him, told him he could stay for an hour, made it clear this was about Sophia, not about him. He showed up with Camilla, which Sarah hadn't anticipated and which immediately set her teeth on edge. She'd specifically told him to come alone, but apparently he'd decided to ignore that request. Camilla was everything Sarah wasn't right now. Thin, well-rested, wearing a stylish outfit that probably cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe. She had perfectly done makeup, manicured nails, an easy smile. She looked like someone whose biggest concern was what to order for brunch, not how to pay for diapers while also covering rent. Sarah watched them together, Diego's hand on Camilla's lower back, the way they whispered to each other and laughed at private jokes. And she felt a rage so intense it made her hands shake. This woman had been sleeping with Diego while Sarah was pregnant. While Sarah was home alone, sick and scared, this woman had been out on dates with Sarah's boyfriend. And now she was here, at Sarah's daughter's birthday party, acting like everything was fine, like she hadn't been complicit in destroying Sarah's life. Jessica noticed Sarah's expression and immediately intercepted her. "Don't," she said quietly. "I know what you're thinking, and don't. It's not worth it. She has no right to be here." "You're right, she doesn't. But causing a scene at Sophia's party isn't going to change anything. It's just going to make things worse." So Sarah swallowed her anger, pasted on a smile, and got through the party. She watched Diego hold Sophia, watched him take photos with his daughter, while his girlfriend who used to be his mistress, stood nearby smiling. She watched her family and friends try not to stare, try not to make the situation more awkward than it already was. And when the party was over, when everyone had left and Sarah was alone cleaning up wrapping paper and deflating balloons, she had a complete breakdown. She sat on the floor of her living room, surrounded by the debris of the party, and sobbed. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Sophia's first birthday should have been joyful, uncomplicated, a celebration of this amazing little human who'd come into the world and changed everything. Instead, it had been tainted by Diego's presence, by Camilla's presence, by the reminder of everything Sarah had lost. She'd been trying so hard to move on, to forgive if not forget, to focus on building a good life for Sophia rather than dwelling on the past. But seeing them together, seeing how completely unaffected Diego was by everything he'd done, it broke something in Sarah. She realized that night that she'd been wrong. Taking the high road, being the bigger person, quietly suffering while he lived his life, that wasn't nobility. It was enabling. It was allowing him to believe that what he'd done was okay, that the consequences weren't that severe, that he could just move on without actually facing what he'd put her through. And Camilla, she needed to know too. She needed to know that the man she was dating, the man she thought loved her, had been using Sarah up until the moment it was no longer convenient. That he was capable of lying, manipulating, betraying. That she wasn't special, she was just the next mark. That night, after Sophia was asleep and the apartment was clean and Sarah had no more distractions from her thoughts, she made a decision. She was done waiting for karma, done being passive, done accepting that her only option was to quietly rebuild while Diego faced no consequences. If the universe wasn't going to deliver justice, she'd have to do it herself. That's when she thought of Marcus. Marcus, her ex from years ago. The MMA fighter who'd always told her, "If anyone ever hurts you, you tell me. I've got your back. Always."